Welcome to the Underline This podcast, the podcast where we unpack the big ideas hiding in the margins. Because the best parts, they're between the lines. Of all the books I've ever read, I don't say this lightly, I've read and listened to quite a few. The best written comes from Cormac McCarthy, and it's found in the book for today, Blood Meridian. It is a big challenge to read for its extreme gritty violence, unique, biblically written style, and bleakness. It was a hard one to digest, but you can tell that this is some of the best writing out there, and you won't find it anywhere else. You might find some similar patterns with some of the influences from Cormac McCarthy, but by far, this was an incredible book. I'll start with some background on the author, explore the historical context of the Wild West, give a high-level summary, break down key themes, and I'll finish with my personal takeaways, per usual. So let's talk about Cormac McCarthy. McCarthy was born in 1933 in Providence, Rhode Island, but spent most of his earlier life in Tennessee. He's a well-accomplished American author and playwright who specialized in Southern Gothic, Western, and post-apocalyptic genres. He's widely regarded as one of the greatest authors of the 20th century and 21st centuries. He started college at the University of Tennessee, but actually didn't graduate. So that should give some hope to some of you that didn't graduate from college and are trying to become a writer. And the reason why he decided to drop out was really to focus time exclusively on writing. Now, with great authors, I think it's interesting to learn about their influences and the environment around them. Like grapes undergoing a process of, I'm going to butcher this word, terroir, not a Frenchman, nor do I speak French, and I think I just proved that right here. But essentially, that's a process of how a grape obtains its unique flavor that you might find in wine. And the same goes for authors and the writing. I've actually written a blog about this process of terroir as a metaphor for people that you can read when I post the blog here in a moment. But if McCarthy's ideas and talents are grapes, his literature really is the wine it produces. The influences around him, authors, and the environment act like mint or vegetation or elevation that give a rich fusion of flavor to that wine that you might take. So like a fine wine, you don't want to drink it in one gulp. You want to savor it. You want to enjoy it. If you take a moment, you can taste and smell the different influences of the grape. And the same goes for Cormac McCarthy. So let's unpack that now. There are a lot of influences from McCarthy's life, and you can see it in his writing. He was influenced by philosophers such as Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, and Schopenhauer promoted philosophies around a godless universe, predetermination, and pessimism. Nietzschean themes in McCarthy's writings are more around relativism and will to power. After reading Blood Meridian and No Country for Old Men, you can see these themes pretty explicitly. For example, in Blood Meridian, you have Judge Holden, who we're going to talk about here in a moment. And in No Country for Old Men, you have Anton Sugar, the professional hitman and antagonist. And both of these men are what would be referred to as Übermensch, which translates to supermen. Now, these aren't the supermen that we love and adore, like Superman or the Avengers. These are the type of supermen that are terrifying and fierce people who are resilient and willing to transcend cultural and societal norms in pursuit of their own vision. They define their own rules. They live without remorse. That being said, you can see these philosophical themes peppered in McCarthy's writing. Now, some of the literary influences from McCarthy included Southern Gothic writers such as William Faulkner, who he once described as one of the greatest authors of the last century, and James Joyce. Traces of Faulkner and Joyce found in McCarthy's writings are found in the use of long sentences, modern techniques, minimal punctuation, mythic tones, morally ambiguous characters, and themes centered around the emotional burden, such as guilt and the trauma from the past. McCarthy's writing has a lot of shared elements with the King James Bible for its language and rhythm. Now, there's similar dictation, sentence structure, and buildup of mythic and epic characters at moments, and even in the headers of each chapter for Blood Meridian, there's a summary of events like the structure of the King James Bible. Now, I'll describe what this looks like, but in the blog I break this down. So, for example, you've got a chapter heading, and below it might say, and this is coming from chapter 6, in the streets, brass teeth, los hereticos, a veteran of the late war, Mir Donaphan, the lip-bound burial, gold seekers, scalp hunters, the judge, free from the prison, et deseo se metan en el país. And that really is like a summary that, again, you'd see in the Bible, similar to what you might find in the King James Bible, in Matthew chapter 1, which says, Christ is born of Mary, she conceives by the power of the Holy Ghost, our Lord is named Jesus. So it's interesting to see that same style and structure found in McCarthy's writings. And all goes along with those themes of making this like a mythos or like an epic. Now, the overlapping themes found in McCarthy's novels and the King James Bible, the apocalypse, different interpretations, violence, redemption, and judgment. Other writers that have been key influences for McCarthy are Herman Melville, Joseph Conrad for their existential questions, human savagery, and dark themes. Melville wrote Moby Dick, and his characters, such as Captain Ahab and Judge Holden, are pretty similar in that they both are antagonists that raise philosophical questions. In Joseph Conrad's most famous novel, Heart of Darkness, he highlights the darkness and capacity for evil that men inflict on one another. Now, the last major influence is history and the American frontier mythology, specifically around the Indian Wars with the Comanches, the Mexican-American War, and the violent chaos of frontier life. Now, McCarthy published his first novel, The Orchard Keeper, in 1965, and would continue to release famous works such as Blood Meridian, All the Pretty Horses, No Country for Old Men, and The Road. He was famous for being reclusive and rarely making appearances for interviews. He lived the majority of his life in El Paso, Texas, and eventually in New Mexico. And a shocking detail about McCarthy is, despite his fame and achievements, he spent his early career pretty much in poverty. And on June 13th, 2023, at age 89, McCarthy passed away, leaving behind a rich literary legacy. All right, now we're going to talk about another major influence in the play, and that is, not in the play, in the book, and that is the history of the Wild West. Cormac McCarthy was heavily inspired by the Wild West, its chaos and dark history. For Blood Meridian, you might say it was the co-author, which is why I'm highlighting it now. And I'd like to pay it its due. The timeline for this book had to have been in the late 1840s, early 1850s in the American Southwest and northern Mexico. Understanding the context of this time really, I think, provides the reader with a lens for how normal violence, lawlessness, and moral ambiguity were during this time and place. First, this period was at a time of aggressive westward expansion when the United States declared its belief of manifest destiny. Now, to paint a picture of the mind of a settler at that time, I pulled a quote from John L. O'Sullivan, an American journalist and diplomat to represent the mindset at that time. He said, "It is our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions." Now, in this blog that I'm going to post after I release this, you actually will see a painting that just shows the idea of how, I think that captures the average mind of an American at this time. You've got settlers that are expanding. There's, and again, this is a painting that you've all probably seen in your U.S. history classes, but it shows a light coming out of one part of the painting, moving to the left. There's a woman draped in white silk, and behind her, there's technology. You can see a train, you can see power lines, you can see settlers that have horse and buggies that are moving to the left of the painting. And on the other side, it's dark. You've got the indigenous groups, you've got wild animals that are running away. And I think this painting does a good job of just really capturing what was going on in the minds of settlers at that time to justify what they're doing. Now, with the United States' belief that it was destined by God to expand its borders, spread democracy, and civilize the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific, conflict after conflict would be viewed as justifiable. From 1846 to 1848, there was the Mexican-American War, and a lot of violence from Blood Meridian comes from the aftermath of that conflict. In 1848, Mexico ceded territory which covers modern-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. Even after the Treaty of Hidalgo, violence and terror would be used to seize control over these territories. You had mercenary groups that would be hired, and shocking discovery that I actually made was that the Glanton gang was inspired by a real mercenary group of scalp hunters led by John Joel Glanton in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. They were veterans of the Mexican-American War, contracted by Chihuahua to hunt Apache warriors. And the book depicted what happened in real life. The government paid for Apache scalps, but Glanton's crew indiscriminately began murdering peaceful Mexicans and other native peoples because, honestly, how do you ascertain who the scalp belonged to? Now, due to the lack of formal legal systems in the region after the war, chaos and extreme vigilantism boiled in the borderlands. Violence was a show of power, and as we'll unpack here in a moment, Blood Meridian paints the landscape with blurred lines of right and wrong. Violence is everywhere. Human life is cheap, and every character acts on their own questionable morals. Now, I believe that context matters to understand how terrifyingly accurate McCarthy's story is of the American West during this era. He deconstructs any romanticism and myths that people may have had about manifest destiny. Again, big disclaimer, this is a tough book to stomach, both for its complexity, but mostly for its violence, and it is extremely violent. Now for the summary of Blood Meridian. The story is about a runaway teenager from Tennessee named The Kid, who joins a gang of drifters and former veterans from the Mexican-American War. This group is the Glanton Gang, a group who collects scalps for state-sanctioned bounty in the Southwest United States. What starts as targeting Apache quickly morphs into massacres of anyone that really crosses their paths. And the novel is filled with philosophical themes, which at the center is the hairless, intelligent, and terrifying Judge Holden. He appears as someone who is supernatural, ageless, and omnipresent. And as the novel escalates and collapses, it's because the gang's notoriety catches up with them, and they become targets for Mexican-American forces, bounty hunters, and groups they've double-crossed. Like a Shakespearean play, few remain as one by one they're killed off. And at the end, the kid becomes the man, and he finds the judge in a final confrontation. Now for key themes from Blood Meridian, starting with the most explicit, and that is violence as the fundamental human condition. McCarthy's use of violence isn't an aberration. It's a natural law. Like I said before, and I'm going to say it again, this, hands down, is the most violent book I've ever read. You'll find similar comments as well on Reddit or Goodreads. There are massacres, executions, and scalpings. There's no moral framing by McCarthy. All the main characters participate, but Judge Holden stands out above the rest. We'll discuss him in more detail here in a moment, but as a preview, Judge Holden is the personification of the idea that war and violence are the natural order of the world. Now, we discussed this theme earlier, so we'll keep it short and sweet, but manifest destiny and imperialism are another. Glanton's gang involvement really is a tool for westward expansion. It's driven by greed and bloodlust. Wherever they go, they leave behind victims of state-sanctioned campaigns. Next, we've got the notorious and bloodthirsty Ubermensch Judge Holden, who is a symbol of evil, chaos, and war itself. He's creepy, and there's something supernatural about him. He records all the things he sees as if it's his divine responsibility to keep an accounting of all things. At one point, he says, "Whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent," which is a chilling dialogue. And his philosophical dialogue suggests that war is the ultimate form of human expression and the only true authority. He says, "It makes no difference what men think of war. War endures. As well, ask men what they think of stone. War was always here, before man was. War waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner. That is the way it was and will be. That way and not some other way." Next, we have fate and free will. Judge Holden mentions that all events are pre-written and human beings are just acting it out. Blood Meridian's protagonist, the kid, has opportunities to show mercy or resist the violence, but rarely takes the time to act decisively. He lets the violent natural law take hold and just goes with the natural flow of the turbulent and violent world that he's found himself in. And this leads to our next key theme, moral ambiguity and the absence of redemption. There are no good characters. Everyone is guilty of atrocities. There's no moral closure. It's survival of the most violent in the Wild West of Blood Meridian. There's no good versus evil. The book shows really a cosmic struggle in an indifferent universe. And finally, the last thing we'll talk about is the harsh indifference of nature. Blood Meridian is written almost in a mythical, biblical style. The settings are described as ancient and grandiose, really indifferent to the events and people inhabiting the landscape. Now for my takeaways. I'll give one last final big disclaimer. This is the most violent book I've ever read. I don't think this will become a movie because of it, and it makes Game of Thrones look cute. Despite the violence, this is a masterpiece. It's difficult to read for a lot of reasons, which is why I recommend reading this slowly. Again, going back to that wine metaphor, this book is like a glass of fine wine. It's not meant to hydrate you. It's meant to be enjoyed slowly so you can appreciate it. If you take the time, you'll notice the incredible writing and mastery of language that McCarthy incorporates. If you take time to think about what's going on, you'll find yourself pondering a lot of profound and abstract ideas. There's a lot of protein in this book. And this is a thought-provoking book. Again, difficult read because of its writing style and violence, but it is worth reading for its sophistication and substance. To conclude, here's a quote to digest after this episode that sums up the gritty, violent, and thought-provoking themes and ideas from Blood Meridian. In the end, the desert keeps no tally. The blood fades, the bones sink. But the question remains, was it all written in the dust before we began to walk? On that sober note, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode today and give you a reminder that if you want wisdom that sticks, follow this blog and Underline This podcast on YouTube and social media for short, impactful articles and videos that get straight to the point. Plus, explore curated tools, books, and resources on the recommendations page that I have included. Everything that's brought real value to me, and I want to share with you, so I can do the same for you. Thanks again, everyone. We'll see you next time.